Hello, everyone. So today I'd like to share with you an excerpt from a book that I have been reading. And the reason I want to share it is because it looks like right now the question of forgiveness is a huge one for our culture. We have a situation that really can't continue. We have kind of two sides basically in the United States, but elsewhere which just label each other basically as evil. We're the good ones, you're the evil ones. And there's differences of opinion on all kinds of actual issues, which are important to be discussed. But when I'm good and you're evil, there really is no discussion to be had. And even worse, when I'm good and you're evil, at least when I see it that way, I can justify just about any kind of atrocity against you because you're evil, right? So you don't fit into the category of how I treat others. And just here in the United States, for years and years and years, the left and the right have been speaking about each other in increasingly dehumanizing terms. Both sides are guilty of this. And was really interesting for me recently when I made a post online, social media post about Erika Kirk, who publicly said that she forgave the killer of her husband, Charlie Kirk. Of course, everyone knows the killing of Charlie Kirk has really brought things to a boiling point. And the post that I made was basically pointing to this act of forgiveness and saying, wow, you know, she she's taking back this label of evil from the other, and she's saying, I forgive. Now, a lot of the responses I got to this post had to do with who Erika Kirk is, what the Turning Point organization is, its ties to the Trump administration, and what the Trump administration is doing. People were pointing to the other speeches in that same memorial, which included many members of the administration. And the basic, and some people appreciated the post. And actually, what was interesting about the post, very few people commented on the act of forgiveness or the meaning of forgiveness. Rather, it was more like, is this authentic forgiveness or not? Is it real, or is this a staged, thing that has other purposes? In my mind, it's so recent that this woman lost her husband that I find it very difficult to think that she's just faking this. But, you know, I'm not actually here to debate that. I just saw a video that was put out by the comedian Bill Maher, where he sort of goes through a litany of things on both the left and the right that he thinks have kind of gone too far. And he's saying, look, can we start over? So I think it's in the air right now. I've seen other things online. Someone was talking about the need for a new political party, and the description of it would be, this is the listening party. People who would go around the country and listen to people, right? Listen to the left, listen to the right, find out what it's like for the other person. And my good friend Daniel Garner of OG Rose has recently been talking about forgiveness as an act of rehumanizing the other. And he points out forgiveness isn't something you do once, it's an ongoing mode of being, and it has to be fully embodied. If you say you forgive someone, but then, you get angry every time someone brings their name up, well, you haven't actually performed authentic forgiveness. So it's a commitment we make. And this is the interesting thing, and this will come to what I want to share, what I want to read, which is that when we don't forgive, it tears us up on the inside. When we hate others, when we categorize others as evil, not only do we dehumanize them, we dehumanize ourselves. And so I'm going to read from a book called The Four Altars, the Book of Liberation, and the author is Alonso del Rio. So this is coming from a very different place than what is happening in the major headlines right now. But actually, this book talks a lot about the world situation. So Alonso del Rio is a curandero in Peru. So he is someone who facilitates ayahuasca ceremonies, and he's been doing this for, I believe, over 50 years now. And in this book, he basically talks about an overall path of liberation, although he uses ayahuasca as a practice. He makes very clear the ayahuasca doesn't do it for you. You really have to take responsibility for your own evolution. And every single day, in every interaction with every thought, you really need to be noticing, are you moving towards the capacity to really be in a state of lovingness, or are you going in the other direction? And a lot of this book really is about forgiveness. It's about being willing to see the humanity in others, regardless of where they're at. So I want to read a section from the book that's called Patterns of Suffering. I'm going to read for a few pages. So, buckle up. But I think there's a lot of really specific points that he makes about the different steps in the process that he goes through. And you'll see he finds himself in a situation that is extremely difficult. And in the end, it's forgiveness that is going to get him out of that situation. If I think there's something that you won't get from the context of the rest of the book, I might add a little commentary, but otherwise I'm just going to read. So again, this is from The Four Altars, the Book of Liberation by Alonso del Rio. In life, we are continuously exposed to various situations that cause pain and suffering. This is an inexorable fact that every individual faces and reacts to in its own way. First, we take in information through the senses, and then we decode it, process it, and ultimately extract our own conclusions, our opinions, or judgments. We cannot prevent unpleasant events from touching our lives, but we can, as soon as they cross the threshold of our perception, give them a better interpretation, an appropriate process, and a positive resolution. The purpose of this text is to reflect on how we can minimize suffering in our lives and understand the mechanisms that augment it. Often, the magnitude of suffering that we experience due to the mismanagement of information is totally out of proportion with the incident itself. It is true that in life, very painful things can happen. We will never know if they came to prevent or ameliorate the effects of something even worse. I'm going to tell you a true story that happened to me, an experience so powerful that it destroyed everything I was and turned me into everything that I am. I share this publicly for the first time with the sole intention of helping to show how extreme the blows must sometimes be to transcend certain structures of the mind. In 2005, a person on the medicine path, so he's saying someone who's, following the practice of drinking ayahuasca and being part of the ayahuasca ceremonies. In 2005, a person on the medicine path, driven by his own confusion and ignorance, held me responsible for a dramatic event that occurred in his life, and from that moment swore to destroy me. This coincided with a period in my life when I was experiencing a profound emotional discomfort caused by the discovery that certain people with whom I had been sitting to drink medicine were on what I considered the dark path. I sunk into a great sadness, believing that nothing made sense anymore, that everything in life was a farce. Little by little, my health began to deteriorate. I performed all the usual tests and examinations of Western medicine in an attempt to detect something that could explain my condition, but they revealed nothing. According to the test results, I was in perfect health, but I was unable to eat, I was extremely weak, and I was overcome by attacks of physical discomfort that brought me to the floor. Soon after this, my second child, Ila, was born. That the moment of birth is the greatest moment of vulnerability in all species was shown to be true in this instance. Ila arrived at a time of great suffering. He was born 2 weeks past his expected due date, but he was not breathing. We were able to resuscitate him, but from that day, he has suffered from what is known as infant cerebral palsy. At that time, I couldn't imagine any greater pain than the suffering caused by knowing my son would grow up in this way, until a little after a year later, the next blow came. I soon realized that all I imagined I had advanced on this path in 25 years was really nothing at all. The most painful event I had to experience in life, and which simultaneously forced me to leave behind my old belief system, was the departure of my older brother. On the physical plane, he was brutally murdered only a few meters from my house at the time when I was going through the worst moments of the third year of this inexplicable crisis. At that moment, he was on his way to help me at my own request, since I could no longer do anything. I couldn't drive a car, go shopping, or support my family. I could not even relate to people anymore. For several years, I had been suffering from insomnia caused by recurring nightmares that someone was coming to kill me. My sleep was destroyed and my nervous system had collapsed. I had stopped holding public ceremonies, maintaining myself by drinking medicine in private until the murder happened. I became aware that the real murderer wasn't whoever physically cut down my brother's body, but was, in fact, a man who goes around sharing medicine and passing himself off as a happy healer. I came to find out that he was consciously working to destroy me through his relationship with what is known in the shamanic traditions as dark magic. In other words, channeling power for manipulative, sinister, and harmful intentions. It can be difficult for the educated modern mind to comprehend that such possibilities even exist outside of fairy tales and movies. In the shamanic world, however, these sorts of manifestations are commonplace and have been for millennia, particularly among traditional indigenous healers. Many people who have been trained in this path develop the ability to hurt someone through their intention. In this world, it is tragically commonplace. Unfortunately, it is practically a rule in such cases that when the one practicing sorcery is unable to destroy their main target, they then focus their energy on causing harm to innocent victims, generally the intended target's closest family members. So in this way, my brother was murdered and my second child almost died, but consequently lives with cerebral palsy to this day. By this time, I had already pinpointed who was doing this and why. It was very hard for me at that time to deal with all the emotions of rancor, hatred, and vengeance that this provoked in me. I began to think that to annihilate this person would be a true service to humanity, that this was someone who had lost control and needed to be stopped. He had already killed someone simply because he was upset, and it caused a great deal of harm to many more. During this time, a part of me was very ill, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I discovered that hatred can lead us to indescribable states of insanity. I visited countless healers of all types and traditions. The vast majority of them pretended to be able to help me, but turned out to be liars, charlatans, and cheats. The few that did understand what was happening to me didn't have the strength necessary to heal me. I lived like this, crossing the valley of pain and madness for 7 years, until one day I finally saw the light at the bottom of my abyss. I came to understand that the greatest harm is not what others can do to you, but what you do to yourself by allowing hatred to take control of you. The bad can only harm us in proportion to the quantity of darkness that we hold inside. I remembered the words of my teacher when he tried to save people who were victims of curses and witchcraft. They don't do anything to you because you're worth nothing to them. It took me many years to understand these words. I considered myself to be a good person, one that lived in the light. But I saw that this was my greatest lie. You only have to squeeze us a little to let loose all the darkness that we keep hidden. Love that is not tested is not love. It is just conjecture. Sometimes we need events that confront us in the most brutal way to see if we are really capable of forgiveness, of understanding. One day, I was going through one of the greatest moments of crisis, remembering the painful death of my brother, when something like a ray of light came to save me. A thought, an understanding that led me to realize how the systems of thought and emotion function. My brother had smoked a lot of tobacco, and I was always a little concerned about the health of his lungs. Suddenly I thought, imagine if he had died of cancer only a few months later. Who then would I blame for my suffering? At that moment, I was able to see with extreme clarity that a large part of the suffering was in my mind, more specifically in my ego. The real pain was one thing, but the patterns of suffering, hate, and violence that I had created and nurtured around the issue were an entirely different matter. My lips demanded justice when in fact my ego wanted revenge. What could I do now with all my hatred after reaching such an understanding? I understood the entire mechanism of the mind, the ego, and its attachment to its ways of thinking, what it takes to let go of our wounds, how our demands for justice in each and every case must be transcended if we truly want to reach love. It is very difficult to see this opportunity when it is in front of us because of our patterns of violence which blind us. I understood that I could stop hating, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved it. I did not wish to continue living in the emotional hell that the darkness of this character had dragged me into. In this way, almost as an act of pure survival, I understood the true role played by evil and darkness in the world. I am absolutely certain that it would have been much more difficult for me to transcend what I needed to leave behind had it not been for the great help of these teachers who transformed into serpents on my path. He helped me do, in a few years, work I had not managed to achieve in almost 30 years. It was liberating to let go of these dark aspects of the mind and emotions, aspects that are not so easy for any of us to detect until we are confronted with a situation that really pushes us to our limit. In any case, the painful role that these people play is worthy of all compassion, becoming channels for pain and darkness because of the simple mismanagement of their emotions. I don't believe in hell or divine judgment. I only believe in consciousness. And there is no worse punishment in the universe than to become conscious and to take full responsibility for all the suffering we've caused to others. That is why the vast majority of people don't want consciousness, because until our mind stops creating and causing suffering, the first part is to live and experience all that suffering with true awareness of all the pain we've caused. This is the only way to understand unity and why we are all one. It isn't that the bad you do comes back to you. That is vain belief. The bad you do, you carry inside wherever you go. The truth is that there is no way to harm others without first harming ourselves, even though at the time we may not be able to see it. Only here Can we understand why we are all one? Of course, for this to be more than just words, sometimes we must experience it, and sometimes in dramatic fashion. This was my way of approaching compassion and finding the thought that heals. Real suffering is caused by actual objective events, but this amounts to no more than 1% of the total suffering we experience in our mind. The remaining 99% of suffering is the mind's recollection and feedback. To appease the ego and not identify with those patterns of revenge is the true path of liberation. It is almost inconceivable that we human beings have developed such an addiction to suffering and placed our identity in these patterns, finding in them all the recognition we seek. If we cannot be the happiest beings on the planet, then we can be the saddest victims and thus attract the attention we crave. If we cannot be the best, we try to be the worst. Is that what the game is all about? Bringing this understanding into our daily lives and the permanent interpretation of the small events that touch our lives, I believe what is most fundamental is to recognize the necessity to re-educate the mind and abandon the patterns that read situations in negative and dramatic ways. We're talking now about better management and use of information. Once you've understood the importance of reading the facts in the most objective way possible, the next step is to understand where you want to go, how all that pain can become fuel, the energy to make a real leap forward and become a little more human. After reading an unpleasant fact in an objective way, our mind is capable of mapping out different routes for us. And depending on which course we follow, our thoughts can lead us to an ocean of peace or a sea of pain. It is true. It just depends on having enough energy and deciding what it is we want to think about. Society has taught us that reality is indisputable, and anyone who questions it must be crazy and should be locked up in a psychiatric ward for public safety. They've taught us to measure our intelligence and measure each other based on our capacity to learn and obey the dominant paradigm. A person that thinks differently or questions its reason is considered seditious or simply ignored. The opinion of a leader whose interpretation of reality supports this system carries far more weight than the opinion of an ordinary person. Although the ordinary citizen may have a correct perception of what is happening, they will most typically commit an ad hominem fallacy, unquestionably giving their assent to popular politicians without considering the intentions and energy that stands behind the message. That is to say that for the system, the truth of a person's perspective on reality depends on the millions of dollars that back the person who transmits the message. If you are an honest, intelligent, but humble person, you do not fit into the parameters and categories of the system. People follow the opinions of the successful people in society, people for whom intelligence and humility are antonyms. It doesn't matter the size of the lies that are made if they are bolstered by a colossal media apparatus and billions of dollars. Supported by their almost unlimited economic resources, they are playing at being gods, creating a Hollywood-esque parallel reality. The result is that the further we move away from reality, the more detached we become from consciousness and true happiness. Your great power is that no one can force you to think in a way you do not want. Even if there are billions of people who think differently or oppositely to you, the quality of your truth can be enough to illuminate millions of lies. To date, however, very few people have shown us another way, and even fewer have warned us of the disastrous consequences of incorrect thinking. This is our real daily work, to learn how to think well. Our mind is an endless source of creativity. When faced with each and every adversity, we all have the capability to manifest a thought that will be medicine instead of poison. This is the task for everyone, to identify from all your options the thought that heals. Finally, when one achieves good thoughts, thanks to being immersed in positive emotions, wonderful substances are secreted into our brain, and we live increasingly in a state in which gratitude ceases to be an effort and quite simply becomes our natural expression of being. We are then able to be grateful for the good and the bad, not because of theory or moral mandate, but because it is a level of understanding, a state of consciousness. Like this, we can see that the state of grace is a permanent state of gratitude. Thank you. The higher the level of consciousness, the more grateful the person will be for the good and the bad. Because one understands that they would not be where they are or who they are without having experienced everything that has happened to them. Thus, it is said, a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. In this state of being, one understands that no matter what our mind may say, it is impossible not to give thanks for the miracle of life. There is no excuse. So our destiny will inevitably be to thank and bless whatever makes contact with our life. For most people, the possibility of changing their way of thinking is an option that does not seem possible in this life. The dominant system of logic tries to impose a system of thought that, if not accepted, leads to suffering, contempt, and punishment for those who reject it. That is why Krishnamurti warned, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. But this is the only way forward, to have the clarity and courage to trust in the miracle of supporting yourself with your own wings and flying towards the altar of love. So I hope you enjoyed that. I really appreciate the reality of what Alonso del Rio writes about, the fact that this is extremely difficult and absolutely necessary. So I'm probably going to be putting out other content on this question of forgiveness, but I'll just make one last point. If you maybe think of someone in your life that you feel has done you wrong, that you feel upset about, that you feel that you've been victimized by that person in some way, even if it's something small, just notice how that feeling sits in your body. So forgiveness is the way to remove those feelings, to remove those contractions that limit our movement, that limit our flexibility to respond in different ways. It doesn't mean that maybe you weren't wronged. It doesn't mean that maybe you weren't hurt or mistreated. So, and the thing about forgiveness is really it's our work, even if we think the other has work to do, and they may well have a work to do. It is our work to free ourselves. And if we are capable of coming to that place in the body where we don't have those labels of right and wrong that are chosen ahead of time, then we can meet others who are different than ourselves, and we can be curious. We can find out what's it like to live within their world. We can discover that we may have some things in common, even though what is most obvious in the beginnings are differences. I think this is crucial work, and invite you to consider how you might bring this work into your own life. Thanks for listening.